Ugh. Yuck. It is so weird to be filming again and do like an actual planned video as opposed to like clips for the first time in months. Oh god, that's sad. We're in September now. It's finally starting to get a bit cooler where I live. And I think with that has come a new burst of energy and creativity. And I thought this would be an easy video to film. So here we are talking about the next round of books, I DNF'd, in the second half of the year, covering May through August. Actually, wait, no, May through July, because I didn't DNF anything in August. Yeah, I did just count to make sure I was not lying. It is 11 books, which is actually like pretty good for me. In the first third of the year, I think I DNF'd 14, and my reading has admittedly slowed down some this summer, so maybe that's why I didn't DNF quite as much, especially when we got into August when I didn't drop anything. But also I was reading less and being a little bit more choosy with what I did pick up. I'm going to try to keep this kind of brief because a lot of these books, quite honestly, I don't remember anything about. There weren't particular reasons why I DNF'd them. Like, I didn't find things offensive really or had a problem with the writing. It was typically I got bored, which is normal for me. So in May, I DNF'd 2 books. In June, it was 3. That was 4 fingers. In June, it was 3. And then July, 7? No, not even that much. 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Starting off though, in May, I DNF'd A Vast Untethered Ocean by R.D. Pyers. This is, I don't really know what the genre is. I guess contemporary, and it's following a man named, it's not Oliver because that's the dead husband. It's following a man whose name I can't remember at the moment. But he is grieving the loss of his husband and is going on this kind of like cross-country road trip with some goal in mind. But the whole time, Ollie's spirit is actually in the truck with him. And primarily we're set in the present day as he is going on this trip and meeting new people and kind of opening himself up to new experiences and making new connections for the first time since Ollie died. But we're also briefly getting some context for their relationship and how it ultimately fell apart before Ollie's death. I probably could have pushed myself to finish it. I think I was maybe like 40-something% in, but honestly, I really didn't get much tension between Ollie and the narrator, who again, I can't remember his name. We got sections from the past and like the tensions in the relationship, but again, it wasn't enough to really convince me to keep going, and this was a big thing for me. It started getting a bit too like feel-good saccharine, and ultimately that's why I put it down. The next DNF was actually kind of a hard choice because I really did like elements of it, but I thought I had gotten enough out of it, and that was Stag Dance by Tori Peters. I've not read Detransition Baby, but I've heard kind of mixed things about it, and I was really interested in Stag Dance because it is short stories and a novella. And just from what I knew of the pieces in this book, they all sounded very different. And I think that's accurate to say I really enjoyed the first 2 stories that we got. They're different genres. One is more like dystopian in like in a near future world. And the other is kind of like this high school romance, but done in a way that does not feel young adult, and I found it refreshing. The problem for me was actually the titular novella, Stag Dance, and I think the way that this book is constructed. When you go from shorter form fiction, and these stories were not short stories, I think they were like, 40, 50 pages. I was so used to like the quick pacing of the short story that when you get to the novella, obviously the pacing is going to be more drawn out. It's going to have more going on, and there's more space to tell the story. But I wasn't getting as much of a story that I cared for. Moving on to June, where I DNF'd 3 books, started off by DNFing Free Men by Katie Simpson Smith. I've had this book for a while, and it's really felt like a summer book ever since I got it. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have picked it up if I hadn't already read 2 of Smith's books. The Weeds, which is her latest book. And I think that came out in 2023. And then The Everlasting, which came out in 2020, and I read during the pandemic and absolutely fell in love with. It's still probably one of my more recent favorites. All of the books I've read by Smith so far have a historical bend. They're inspired by true events to some extent. And that's the case with Free Men. It follows three men, a white man, an escaped slave, and a Native American. He's not a tracker. I can't remember. He might be just like a guide. But they've committed some sort of crime and they are trying to escape. The whole time they are being followed by this French tracker who wants to figure out what they're escaping from and what sort of crime they've committed. So the setup's interesting, and for the most part, I did like the writing. It wasn't as lyrical to me as Smith's writing in the other two books of hers I read, but this is, I think, her second novel, so that makes sense. But I was bored. The way that this is set up is we get shorter chapters from the tracker's point of view, and then I think 2 to 3 chapters from each of the free men. We learn about their history and their past, kind of their character and what their goals are. But I really didn't feel connected to any of them. This is another book I probably could have made myself finish, but I would not have enjoyed it. Next, I DNF'd Brute by Kim Fielding. This is the second Fielding book I picked up because my library had it through Hoopla, and I really enjoyed the first book of hers I read, which was Rattlesnake. Brute is completely different from that, whereas Rattlesnake is set in our world and is sort of like this Western-inspired romance. Brute is fantasy, and at least for me, not a really compelling fantasy. I don't mind a soft fantasy world, but there really wasn't much in the world building here for me, or the character building, honestly. The main character, Brute, I liked him, but everything else kind of fell apart. This is following a man who, as his name implies, is very large, very strong, and is seen as ugly and a threat and someone to be avoided. And ultimately, it's about him coming into himself and finding love and community. And that sounds great, but I really did not care about anyone. And that's why I dropped it 25% in. This next book might be the most disappointing because I invested time and money into the first 3 books, and that is The Tomb of Dragons by Catherine Addison. This is the 3rd book in the Cemeteries of Amalo series, which is a companion series to The Goblin Emperor. And I read The Goblin Emperor and the first 2 books in this trilogy last year. And it's not been my favorite fantasy series, fantasy world, but I really do admire how complex it is. It is very complicated. There is a lot of thought put into the different religions and naming conventions that often would go over my head, but I had enough of a grasp of it where I wasn't completely in the dark and I was able to keep up with things. This trilogy is in line with The Goblin Emperor in that we're focusing a lot on various mysteries. There's a lot of the world being built up. However, I would not recommend trying to read this trilogy without having read The Goblin Emperor. But all of that is to say, I enjoyed the first 2 books. They weren't my favorite, but I was excited to see how things concluded, especially because of the most slow burn romance I think I've ever read written about. And so I was really excited to see that come to fruition here. The author pulls like a complete bait and switch. You cannot tell me Catherine Addison did not set up these 2 characters to be in a romantic relationship and then completely, I don't know if she just lost interest in them as a couple, but it felt very shoehorned in the way that they have a discussion about, oh, I love you, but not like that. And as someone who's aro ace, I love to see that in books. I think that's great representation. It's not explored enough. It does not work, though, if you have built up a romantic relationship over 2 books, and then in this 3rd book, you introduce a random new love interest who has no chemistry with the main character. That was like one of the most frustrating things for me. Nothing against him as a character because we don't know him. And I'm saying that as someone who got probably like 2/3 into this before I decided to stop. I will say that is not the only reason I stopped, because I don't know if too much time had passed between I'd read the first 2 books as well as The Goblin Emperor, and then started on this one. It had been over a year. But I found I had the hardest time keeping up with all the different religions, all the different buildings, all the government sectors, all the different titles that people have. And there was a mundanity to this one in particular that makes sense coming from the character's perspective, because he is very much regimented and task oriented. It kind of just helps with his mental health. It makes sense. But it was so unpleasant to read and so boring that I really did not think I was going to enjoy this if I finished, and ultimately I decided to DNF it and unhaul this trilogy. I'm keeping The Goblin Emperor because I still really enjoyed that, and that was one of the few highlights of this book, is that we did get to see Maya, who is the Goblin Emperor, and another character from that book appear, and seeing the way that Maya has grown as a character was really nice. But yeah, hopefully this and the other 2 books in the trilogy can go to a better home. All right, this is going on too long. I got to start speeding things up. The next book that I DNF'd, kind of disappointing, I guess. It was the first volume of Thousand Autumns by Ming Shi. This is the second Danmei series I have set out to read and ultimately DNF'd. Not because it was offensive or anything. It's just I was not interested in the characters, honestly. The writing was okay. I liked how this one was grounded so much in the historical aspect of different religious sects that do exist, but I really just didn't care much about it. Also, at this point, I realize I'm being very inconsistent with whether I say something about the synopsis for the books I'm DNFing or just talking about why I dropped them, but I'm going to just continue to go and flip between as I see fit. Editing Coco here, realizing that it completely slipped in my mind while I was filming to talk about one of the books that I DNF'd. Like, I completely went over it, and I think it's because I have a bit of a mental block toward it, but that was the short story collection Welcome to the Monkey House by Kurt Vonnegut. I have never read anything by Vonnegut before. I'm just familiar with his name and the titles of his books, and I thought this would be a good introduction to him. And what I liked about the several stories I read was that they were all different genres, so it showed some versatility when it comes to Vonnegut as an author. However, the main story, the titular story, upset me so much that I just shut the book and have no intention of picking it up again. The next 2 books I'm going over pretty quickly because I DNF'd them, I think, back to back, and didn't get too far into either of them. But the first one is Queen of Kings by Maria Devana Headley. This is a fantastical reimagining of Cleopatra's death and afterlife, following her as the sort of vampiric creature who is set out to destroy Octavian after Mark Antony is killed and she has lost power in Egypt. I love Maria Devana Headley as an individual and a scholar. I think she's brilliant. Her book, The Mere Wife, is my favorite novel of all time. I've read it probably 9 times at this point. I really like her translation of Beowulf, but I was not in this at all. I tried to stay in it. I tried to connect with Cleopatra and the other characters. And what I did like was that Octavian was not presented as like a stereotypical villain. He felt more like an antagonist with different complexities that made reading his perspective more interesting than reading Cleopatra's. So yeah, I didn't even get 100 pages into this before I dropped it. And then after that, pretty quickly, I tried to read and DNF'd The Dirt in Our Skin by JJ and Selmy. This is what I get for just buying something because it's queer. Because this is about BMX, which, 1, I have no interest in reading about, 2, I have no interest in learning about, and 3, I know nothing about it. So already I was like biased against this book. I read about 60 pages and was just bored. Didn't connect with either of the characters that were explored, especially the protagonist. And yeah, I just didn't get much out of this, but maybe someone else will. This next book is one that, kind of like Stag Dance, I debated whether I wanted to DNF. Ultimately, I just skimmed it. But that is the webcomic DPS Only by Valenci. I will not lie. I picked this up because Valenci is the artist who illustrated the Scum Villain self-saving system. I love her art. I love her character designs. And I found this big bind up for like $3 and thought I'd give it a chance. And what I read of it, which was probably about half, maybe not quite half, was actually really compelling. This is following Vicky, who is a teenage girl being raised by her older brother, Virgil, who plays this game. I believe it's Zenith Orion. He plays Zenith Orion professionally, and Vicky is kind of like this backup to him. She takes care of like his social media things, responses in that regard. However, she actually plays the game in secret. No one knows, because Zenith Orion, like actual gaming communities, is so often like disparaging of women and not welcoming. So she plays in secret until she gets the opportunity to join an actual tournament where she may eventually have to play against her brother and have her secret come out. There is nothing wrong with this at all. Story-wise, craft-wise, art-wise, I think it was really good. But it just wasn't holding my interest, and maybe it's because I'm not into gaming. I don't know. But I really do think it has a great message. It has complicated relationships, and I think a lot of people would enjoy it. And now, for the final book. Kind of sad about this one because I DNF'd Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was my first TJR book to try out, to honestly be interested in at all, and it was a flop. Atmosphere is not so subtly inspired by the Challenger disaster in the 80s, and I think that's pretty common knowledge going in if you know much about American history. I was so intrigued by how that was going to be like, kind of like repackaged and reshaped into this new story, this new disaster. I was so disappointed. Oh my gosh. I did not like the writing at all. I found it very telling, not showing. It felt like she was maybe trying to lean too hard into the 80s element, and like our main character Joan is more of a reserved individual. She leaned too heavily on that to kind of portray Joan as naive for no reason. Her love of space and the depth that we get from her love of space, I feel like it's something you would find just someone writing about online. I love Tumblr, but it's like a bad Tumblr post. Also, there was a lot of times when Joan, who is the main character, Joan would be saying or thinking something, and it was just, she was a mouthpiece for the author, and it just was very poorly done. So yeah, I DNF'd it. The lesbians were nice, but they weren't enough to keep me around, unfortunately. I couldn't even stay for them. Alright, I'm tired of talking. This has been going on way too long at this point. I'm hoping again that the microphone audio is better than just using my phone. We'll see. If it does not make an appearance again, you know why. But yeah, if you did stick around for this, thank you. If you have read any of these books or if you DNF'd them, please let me know why. I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. And hopefully going forward throughout the rest of this year, I will continue to be motivated, somewhat motivated to film more, to put more time into editing and to film things that I enjoy.